If you're like me and inspired by the garden or nature, then this video is for you. Today I'm sharing my top 10 most favorite garden-inspired crafts. Let's get crafting. My mom had this old water kettle just sitting around, not doing anything. She was going to get rid of it. And I thought, you know what, I could do something really cool with this. So I started off by removing the handle. There was a couple of screws there and I went ahead and did that. And now I'm going to be giving the piece a coat of some white gesso. I'll be giving it about 1 to 2 coats. It really depends on how thick your gesso is. I have a lot of people asking me why I use gesso. Well, I find that gesso is a great primer to use on slick surfaces such as this piece here. And it also is really nice to be able to cover up any dark colors that are showing. So you can see I added just 1 coat, it looks like. I'm going to go over it now with some cream paint. That is another thing that's great about gesso, is that it preps the surface to accept craft paint, because I find that craft paint doesn't always stick very well to slick surfaces, and this really helps it to adhere. So I gave it 2 coats of the cream paint, allowing everything to dry well in between each coat. I've got this beautiful napkin. It's got some beautiful garden roses and some butterflies. I'm just going to take it apart, remove the backing, and then I'm going to be tearing out individual rose pieces that you can see. I'm going to be just tearing those out. There's a couple ways you can do it. You can just tear them out like I'm doing here, or you can take a water brush and just go around it, and that helps to loosen up and tear away the images nicely as well. Okay, so I've got my stack of images here. I'm going to be using some matte decoupage. This is the DecoArt brand, but there's other brands that I like to use as well. I'm figuring out my placement. I just wanted to see what it would look like really covering it all up with the rose images, or what it will look like if I kind of disperse them a little bit more. And I decided to kind of disperse them just so that there's a bit of space in between each one, but that's really going to be up to you. You could also cover this with some tissue paper. I decided to go with the roses, and I tore them out because I figure if you have the individual images, you have more control of the placement. So I just find that it makes it a really easy to do a project like this, but that's again just personal preference. I'm going to go ahead, I placed a layer of decoupage glue onto the container and put the napkin into place and then gave it a coat over top. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue to work on my piece until I get a look that I'm happy with. One thing I did end up doing as well is actually tearing out smaller pieces from those larger images, and it helps to get into these tiny little spots where you just need just a little extra. And I also tore away some of the butterflies. I wanted to have those. Once you've got all those images in place, you're going to go ahead and just give the entire piece a coat of your decoupage glue, and then you're going to allow it to dry well. That's going to help to seal in not only just the napkins, but as well as the paint. All right, for the handle, I've got some wood beads and some wire. I decided that I wanted to make a handle out of the wood beads. And these wood beads, they've got a nice big hole, and believe it or not, they actually fit over the holes where the screws went in to hold the original handle in place. I'm using a heavy gauged wire here. I created a loop on one end, and that's going to fit inside that hole. What that'll do is allow me to put some hot glue into the hole, and that'll give the hot glue, something to grip onto to help hold the wire into place. It's also going to prevent my beads from falling off as I string the wire. So you can paint these wood beads if you like. I decided to leave mine plain. I thought it looked best. I just had to kind of play around here to see how many beads I needed. But before I did that, I'm going to put the one end into place onto the kettle. And I'm also gonna glue that top bead into place as well. That will prevent it from moving around too much and also help to hold the wire in place even more than just having hot glue in that hole. Now I'm gonna just see how long I want my handle to be. I decided I'm gonna remove some of those wood beads. One of them was a little bit, I don't know, it didn't go through the tumbling machine properly, I guess, at the factory. So I pulled that one off, replaced it. I also made the strand a little shorter. I cut it down, and now I'm going to create a loop on the opposite end and trim off any excess wire as needed. And then I will be gluing that little end in place as well. And that's it. So this piece is going to be great to actually put some fresh flowers in. You could also put a plant in there if you'd like. I just love how this turned out, and my mom really likes it too. I picked up this nightlight from a store called Dollarama here in Canada, but you can get them at Walmart, Dollar Tree, and other stores. I wanted to decorate it. I wanted to create a fairy garden look on it. So I'm going to be using that washi sticker, and I'm using some acetate packaging. I'm going to be cutting that packaging down to size. You can see that the light panel or the plastic panel on the nightlight, it wasn't big enough to hold the sticker. So I'm going to place the sticker on this packaging and then cut the packaging down so I can place it over top of that plastic panel that's on the nightlight. It is actually a really effective trick. So I put my sticker into place. I'm just going to smooth it out. If you can't get your hands on a washi sticker like this, you could print something out just on some basic copy paper. You can go to a website like the Graphics Fairy and find some fun images, or, maybe you've got something already. Just go ahead and use that. And you can do all kinds of things with these night lights. I really wanted to try this fairy garden look. You can see I cut the plastic packaging down to size. I also created a frame around it. And I cut off the bottom because I needed that to sit flat against the base of the nightlight, like you see me doing right here. So to continue on with that forest fairy kind of look, I am going to be decorating this with some branches, but I wanted to get my little image into place. So I am going to be using some hot glue. I put some at the base, like you see me doing right there, putting my image into place. And then I'm being careful where I put my glue. I'm just going to put a couple of small dots of glue at the top in the corners, because that will show through my image when I go to plug it in, and you're going to see the glow of the light. You're going to end up seeing those shadows. Here I'm putting the nightlight in a box just to help to stabilize it, and then I'm going to be cutting some branches down to size. The reason why I left that little edge around the sticker from the packaging, that's going to give me a base for me to glue all these branches down. So all you need to do is cut them down, and I am just going to use some hot glue to put them into place. And I'm creating a bit of a frame all around the image. So for another added little touch, I am going to add some some preserved reindeer moss. I'm just going to add some little bits here and there in amongst the branches, as if you're going out into the forest and you see this pretty little fairy garden. That's what you're going to see, is some pretty little bits of green moss in the forest. And I just really like that look. I tested my nightlight off camera and discovered that you could see that back panel and where the sticker portion, they don't meet. So I decided to fill in the front part with some branches, and that got rid of that sharp edge that you would end up seeing when your nightlight is plugged in. Hopefully you can find a nightlight that is big enough to accommodate a project like this, or maybe you just have to do it on a smaller scale. Just get creative and see how you can recreate something like this for a really pretty and whimsical nightlight. I have these really large wood beads and I wanted to attempt to decoupage on them. I had this pretty tissue paper that I got from Dollar Tree a few years ago, and I love the flower pattern. I'm going to be using some matte decoupage glue and a soft bristle paintbrush. I also like to put my wood beads on a paintbrush. That gives you something to hold on to while you are applying the glue. I'm tearing out all my little images here. I've got a nice stack. I may need to tear them down further as we go. So I'm going to start adding my glue here and giving a generous coat. The tissue paper I am using is a little thicker, so I'm being a little more generous with the glue. I'm going to cover my entire bead and then I'm going to start to apply my pieces of tissue paper. Like I said before, you may need to tear these down further. But I managed to like press and manipulate the paper into place. And then I will have to go in and add a bit more tissue. You can also paint these first if you choose, but I found that the light color of the wood didn't affect the image at all. So I just went ahead and just left them as is. So I'm going to just continue to apply the tissue and then I'm going to set them aside and allow them to dry well. Just a little tip here, I will get a glass jar and place the beads in that jar, and that will help to keep them upright and allow them to dry. Okay, so here's my wood beads. They're all nice and dry and look how beautiful they are. I think these turned out so well. So for another little decorative touch, as I am going to be making a wood bead garland, I'm going to decoupage a wood tag. You can get these at the dollar store or craft stores. Again, same thing as I did with the wood bead. Apply my glue, press my tissue paper into place and go over the surface with another coat of glue, and I'm going to do the same thing for the front and the back. Before I do the back side, I did allow the first layer to dry, and then I'm going to trim off the excess. Remember to remove any tissue paper from the hole of your tag because you need to be able to put your string in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. So while my tag is drying, I'm going to work on a tassel that I wanted for the opposite end of my garland. I'm just going to wrap this beautiful dark green jute twine that I had in my stash, wrapped it around my fingers several times. I have another strand here. It's nice and long. I'm going to be tying that tassel onto one end of that nice long strand, and I'm going to tie it tight. The rest of that strand is going to be where I put my wood beads. So you could probably do this separately, but I decided to try and do this all on one strand. I did cut off one extra strand. Here I'm just cutting through my loops and trimming it off. That's going to create your tassel. But with that extra strand that I cut off, I'm going to wrap that around several times at the top of the tassel and I'm going to tie that off. That's going to help form the tassel shape. I did go in and add just a little bit of hot glue to help hold that knot. I just find that sometimes jute twine doesn't always hold together that well. Here I'm adding a piece of tape to the opposite end of our twine, and that's going to allow me to strand my beads on more easily. Sometimes I find that with jute twine, it kind of gets caught up on the wood fibers, and adding this tape just makes it so much easier to string them on. So I figured out a pattern first. I'm going with 3 dark brown beads and then my decoupage bead. I had these dark brown beads. I picked them up from, I think, a thrift store several years ago. And I thought it would be a different touch rather than going with the light colored wood. I really like the richness that these dark stained beads have, especially with these pretty florals and this dark green twine that I have. So earlier when I did my tassel, I didn't cut off the one end. I'm gonna put that through the wood beads as well, and that's going to hide it nicely. Okay, so I've got my 3 dark stain wood beads on. Now I'm going to put the decoupage bead on. It's looking so pretty. I love this. I'm so happy with how these beads turned out. It did take a little extra work, but I have to say, I think it's definitely worth it. This is going to be such a beautiful, unique piece that you can put on display for your home decor. All right, so I've got all my beads on. Now it's time to add the tag. I thought for another added little embellishment, I would add this dark stain wood flower. It's just a laser cut flower. You can get them from the craft stores. It went nicely with the dark wood beads, so I thought it would be a nice added touch. I'm just gonna tie the tag on and that will be it. I think this seriously it really is one of my favorite projects that I've done, and I still have it and it's holding up really well. I had this tin and it was full of mints. You can get them from Dollar Tree. We can also use an Altoid tin or whatever you can find. I am going to be giving it a coat of some gesso again. So the gesso is going to seal in all that red paint because I find that red actually seeps through. It doesn't matter what the finish is, it just seems to seep through, and gesso helps prevent that. I mixed some chalk paint, some green chalk paint with some green cream craft paint. The cream craft paint just helped to lighten it up a little bit. And now I'm going to give this tin a coat of that chalk paint mixture as well. I did give the tin 2 coats of decoupage glue, and then I gave the inside of the tin 2 coats of the chalk paint. It's all nice and dry. I allowed everything to dry in between each coat of paint. I've got this piece of dry floral foam. It's cut down to size, and I put that and glued it into the base of the container. Next, I'm going to be filling the lid with some preserved reindeer moss. I wanted to create a pretty little garden scene inside this tin, and I thought the moss would kind of resemble grass in a way. I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. And then you can see I left a little bit of space there because I wanted to add a little embellishment in the lid. Now I'm going to fill in the base here with some of the preserved reindeer moss as well. Got that all in place. I think it's looking so pretty and fresh. So I have got all these pretty little embellishments, some flowers, a bird, a little bunny figurine, and some other flowers left over from a previous project. I wanted the lid to stay open. So what I did was just added some glue on the inside of the lid, lifted it up in place where I wanted it to be, and then I also added some glue on the back side. Now on the back side, you could also cover that up with a bit of moss if you'd like. I didn't bother, I just left mine as is. That's up to you though. And now we can start to decorate the tin. I did move some of the moss out of the way so then I could glue my little figurine in place onto the moss. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just continue to work on filling in this piece. The little bird is cute. You could also add a nest if you'd like. I did make this more for spring, but this could totally be changed out to suit any season. I just think it's such a fun way to use up all those little extra bits that you may have laying around left over from previous projects. So this is how the piece is looking so far. Now I am going to add this spring sticker. So instead of using a spring sticker, you could put like a little summer sticker there, or you could put like a different little banner, any other embellishment that you'd like. But I'm going to just show you how I adhered this. I put some wood beads on the back of this sticker. You could see also I had removed the foam tacky bit off of the back. Putting those wood beads in place, I'm going to then glue that to the back of the lid. What the wood beads do is just create more depth. You could use foam tape instead, but I found that the wood beads actually made it a little bit easier, a little faster. So I figured out my placement, and then I'm going to just add hot glue, and then I'm going to put this into place. Like I said, you could just change this all out according to the season, but this is such a cute little tin, and I love to put it on display. And in fact, this year, I think I am going to change out that little spring sign and put something else. I'll have to see what I can come up with. I've got some matte decoupage glue. This time I'm using the Art Minds brand. I also have this birch bark napkin. I'm going to be removing the backing off of this. It's such a beautiful napkin. A friend of mine had given it to me a while ago. If you don't have the birch bark pattern, you can definitely just use a floral or whatever other nature scene that you can find. I'm going to be cutting a piece down that's about half the size of this wine bottle. Yes, we are going to be decorating this clear glass wine bottle. And I am also going to be adhering this napkin the way you see it right now. I wanted the top side up. I wanted to be able to see that birch bark pattern showing through the glass. So I'm going to apply a coat of the decoupage glue just on one half of the wine bottle. I'm pressing it into the napkin and I'm going to roll it. I found that that worked best to get that adhered exactly where I needed it, and also so it's nice and straight. I'm going to go ahead and add some decoupage glue over the top now to help to seal that all in, and then I'm going to allow that to dry. Okay, so it's all nice and dry. Next, I am taking some masking tape. First going to place my bottle into a box to help to stabilize it. I wanted to create a window on the front side of the wine bottle. So I wanted to make sure that all the edges of the tape were nice and straight. So I did go in and cut the ends to make sure they were nice and straight. That way here I will have a nice clean window when I'm all done. Now, I'm going to let you know that this project is tedious, but in the end, I have to say again, it has been one of my most favorite projects that I have done. It still looks really, really good after years later, and I love it. All right, so I've got my window in place. Now I'm going to give the bottle 2 coats of some white acrylic paint. Now I'm just using a student grade white acrylic. You could use some white gesso, or you could use some chalk paint, whatever you like, but it's really important that you give this piece a coat of white paint first. That way here you can see it's coating the back side of the napkin, and you're going to just see white, because now the next layer I'm adding is black paint. Again, black acrylic paint. It's just student grade acrylic paint. I wanted to add this dark black paint because I'm going to be adding lights. And if I didn't do that, you're going to see the glow of the lights coming through each layer, and it'll look kind of funny. I wanted that light to just be focused through that window. So the black paint is all dry. Now I'm going in and adding another coat of white paint. And you're probably thinking, like, Donna, this is an awful lot of work. Trust me, you need to do each of these steps. I'm adding the white paint now because I'm going to be decoupaging the rest of this bottle, and I didn't want black paint to be showing through my napkin when I put it back into place. I wanted the white paint to be showing through. It'll help the pattern of the napkin to show through really well. All right, so the paint's all nice and dry. I'm now going to be removing the tape, and then I'm going to go in with a cloth and remove any of the excess paint that may have gotten in that window. You can see how nice that looks. You can see the image of the inside showing through. It's beautiful. And you don't have to do this with the birch bark. You can do this with any patterned tissue paper or napkin. All right, so now it's time to finish decoupaging the rest of the bottle. I'm being very careful, getting it right up to the edge of the paint line there. And then I'm just going to work in sections. I'm going to bud that edge up to the edge of the paint, just like you see me doing there, smoothing it out. And then I'm going to continue to go along and add my decoupage onto the bottle, smoothing out the napkin over top until I get to the other side. On the other side, I am going to use some scissors to trim that off. Again, I wanted a nice clean edge to work with here. All right, so now all I have to do is go ahead and add a layer of my glue over top of the work that I've done already. And then I'm gonna finish covering up the rest of my bottle. For small little sections like you see me here, I'm just tearing some small pieces of the napkin and gluing those down. And then I'm gonna finish covering the rest of the bottle. I'll be setting it aside, allowing that to dry well. It turned out so beautiful. This is what it's looking like now that it's all dry. I think it turned out really, really good. It's so cool being able to see that birch bark coming through that window that we made. All right, so for the garden look, I'm shoving some preserved reindeer moss down into the hole of the bottle. I am using more like a shredded version of some Spanish moss. I think I got this bag from Dollar Tree. Yes, I got it from Dollar Tree. I'm also using a nice long paintbrush. That's going to help me move things around inside the bottle. Next, I'm adding some branches. I'm just going to break them down and then allow them to fall down to the bottom. I'm creating like a fun little whimsical forest garden floor. I'm going to put those into place. Now you can see I've actually got these bottle lights. They're all nice warm white. They're perfect for wine bottles. That's actually what they were made for. I'm going to start to add these lights to the bottle. So I am going to be creating a beautiful butterfly garden inside of this bottle. And I'm going to be gluing these paper butterflies onto the branches. I had bought these paper butterflies from Dollar Tree a few years ago, and they worked really well for this project. Now you may be wondering, why am I not just dropping the butterflies into the bottle? Well, I wanted some better control, and gluing them onto a branch will allow me to have the look that butterflies are flying around inside the jar. So I'm adding some more branches into the jar. I found that adding some upside down just created some interest to this piece. Adding some more lights, I'm layering everything. Now I'm going to add my little butterfly branches. The beauty about using the paper ones is that they can fold and you can slip them through the hole. They're small enough to go in through that hole. I'm using my nice long handled paintbrush to push them down in, and then you can kind of move them around a little bit as well. So I'm going to continue to add my branches that have got the butterflies on them, add more lights, add more branches as needed until I am happy with this. I did end up having to add some butterflies lower down as well. You're just going to have to try and play around and experiment. The one thing I will say is that once everything's in place, you can't move it again. You would actually have to break the bottle to get everything out. Once everything's in there, it is in there for good. But once everything is actually in there, you don't have to worry about like things coming apart. It's going to stay stable because it's not something that's going to be used all the time. It's just for display purposes. I decided that I'm going to frame out the window with some branches. I just thought it would finish that off nicely. So I'm just going to use some hot glue to put those into place. I'm also going to go ahead and add just a little bit of the Spanish moss here and there. Again, that'll just kind of tie in the scene on the inside of our bottle. And then I'm going to add some paper butterflies to the outside as well. Just help tie it all together. It is, I can't believe like this was such a labor of love. There's just so many of these garden inspired pieces that I have made over the years that really are a labor of love. But as you can see, it's definitely worth it. This is beautiful. It's one of my absolute most favorite pieces that I've done. So I'm adding just a little bit of the moss around the top. I just thought it would just kind of finish that off nicely. You could add some jute twine if you'd like, or some ribbon, whatever you'd like. But let me know what you think. If you didn't want to do the butterfly scene, you could definitely add some flowers instead. Just get creative with it and let me know what you think. For this project, I'm using this beautiful birch bark tube that I had found out in the forest. If you find something like this, you just have to make sure that it is empty of any contents. If there's any spots lifting, you can just glue them back into place. If you can't find anything like this, then just take a paper tube, cover it in scrapbook paper that's birch bark pattern, fabric, anything you would like. So for at the ends, I am going to be using these wood slices. Now, I got my inspiration from these particular pieces that I had found on Pinterest. And these were done using a whole piece of wood. I didn't have that, and I also wanted to try and recreate this in an easier way. So I thought creating a faux log by plugging off the ends with a couple of wood slices that I got from the dollar store would work. If you don't want to do it that way, you could fill the ends in with moss. I'm just gluing in one of the wood slices on one end. You do not want to glue the other end in place because we need that piece to be removable. So here's that end. You can see that there's a bit of a notch here. That is perfect. If your piece doesn't have a notch, cut one out. You want this wood slice to be removable. We're going to be placing a battery pack inside there, and we need that battery pack to be accessible. So moss is a great alternative. I'm going to be using this garden stake that I got from a store called Dollarama, but you can use jumbo craft sticks. You can pick those up at Walmart. So right now I'm just trying to figure out where I need to cut this down. I'm just going to use a craft knife, cut through a couple of layers, and then I'm going to be snapping that where I use my craft knife to cut through. You can see how easy it is to snap once you cut through a few layers. I've already decided on which is going to be the top portion of my log. I'm using a craft knife, and as you can see, I had already used my wood piece to figure out how big of a hole I need to cut out. So I'm just applying some pressure, being very careful not to apply too much pressure that I actually crack the bark. I just want to be able to cut through it. And once I'm able to, I'm just going to take my scissors and start to cut away at that bark until I am left with a rectangular opening. That rectangular opening should be slightly smaller than that piece of craft stick or garden stake piece that we had cut down to size. So you can see here our craft stick is just a little bit bigger than our hole, and that's exactly what you want. We're just going to put it inside, and you can see how it just fits underneath. There should be a little bit of a lip on each side. All right, so I'm going to put my battery pack in place, and you can see how it's kind of wobbly. We will be fixing that issue here in a bit. I'm going to place my fairy lights in through the hole. This is a 10 strand of fairy lights. And you can see how the wire is kind of backed around itself, and you want to make sure that the switch is facing outward. So I'm going to be using these quartz crystals I got from BB Craft several years ago now, but I have seen them at Michael's and other online stores. I'm just going to lay them out on that little wood slice that I have. And I'm just kind of roughly just making sure I have enough to fill that that wood slice. Now I'm just going to be using my crocodile, and I'm going to be punching some holes, the 1/8 hole size, into the wood piece. So the reason for this is going to be really cool. I can't wait to share this with you. It is just unreal how beautiful this piece is going to be. So I'm just going to make sure that the holes are within the opening of our birch bark tube. I've punched a total of 10 holes, one for each crystal. Okay, so now I'm going to add a hot glue to each hole, and then our LED fairy lights, I'm going to turn them on, and I'm pressing each individual LED light into the hole with glue, and then adding some more glue to that hole. I'm going to be doing this for each light and each hole individually. You can see that I am using my finger to kind of press the glue into place. I'm allowing that glue to cool down for a little bit, and then I press it down. That way here I know that the light is going to stay in place in that hole. So if you have a really close look at your fairy lights, you'll kind of see that they're a little bit rounded on one side, and that is the side that I'm pushing into the hole. If you don't have a big chomper, I would definitely just carefully put a hole into this wood piece. You could try to drill it through, but this wood is actually pretty fragile, so just be careful. So as you can see, I've got all my lights into all the holes. I'm just working on the last one right here, and it's turned out really cool. I really like how well this worked. So I'm just going to tuck all my wires inside. Now I'm going to put the wood piece inside our tube, just like you see me doing right here. So I'm just going to make sure that it is lined up so that there is a bit of a rim around the wood piece. And then I'm going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to start to add some glue around each edge. So I'm just going to put it underneath the lip of the birch bark. And you're just going to run a bit of glue. And then it's really, really important that you hold it in place until the glue sets. Once the glue is set on one side, you can go ahead and work on the other side and do the same thing. Apply glue and then hold till the glue is set. So on the ends, you can see there's a bit more of a gap. So I'm just going to build up layers of glue until I've got a really good, solid, secure spot on each end. And go ahead and add some extra hot glue as needed around each seam. So the wood piece is all set into place, and you can see how wobbly this piece is. So I decided that I would use another piece of this garden stake or your craft stick. I'm just cutting it down to size, and then I am going to glue it to the base of this piece. You just want to make sure that it is centered and it's on the right spot, so then the wood slice that's all got the lights in it is facing directly up. So I'm applying some wood glue and I'm going to place that into the bottom, just like you see me doing there. And then if you need to, go ahead and add some extra hot glue. Now, as you can see, you can see that wood slice, but don't worry, we are going to be covering that up here in a bit. Once the glue has set on there, you can turn your lights on. Feel free to put the wood slice back in or your moss, whatever you are using for the end. And you got that little notch so you can pull out that one wood slice. Here, I'm going to just show you quickly what it looks like with moss. It's really cute as well and very, very easy to access that battery pack. All right, so now I'm going to start to glue my little crystals into place over top of those lights. So some of mine are kind of broken, so I'm just going to build up a layer of glue on this just so it can stick up a little bit better on my wood slice. I'm adding glue, letting it cool, adding some more glue until I get a look that I am happy with. Now, I didn't have to do this to all my crystal pieces, and you may not have to do this step as well. So it just depends on the type of crystals that you have and the quality that you have. So now you can add a little glue, put the crystal over top of one of those lights, and you can see how beautiful that glow is. So the original inspiration pieces were absolutely gorgeous. They really, really were. And I just couldn't resist. I'm like, I have all the supplies. I am just going to go for it. I'm going to try to make my own. And I have to say, I am so pleased with how it's coming together. So I'm just going to continue to add the glue, add the crystals over the lights until I get it all filled up. This is absolutely stunning so far. Now we need to cover up our work. I'm going to use some preserved reindeer moss, and I like to add just a little bit of glue in between, and then I'm using a bamboo skewer to push that moss into place, because as you can see, there's lots of little crevices in around the crystals, and it's kind of hard to get my finger in there. So I'm just going to push the moss into the glue and allow that glue to set. I'm going to continue to work in around until I get that wood slice or the wood piece all covered up, and then we'll work on the rest of the piece. So it's really coming together nicely. Now I'm just going to go around the outside edge just to cover up our cut line on the birch bark, and I'm just adding just a little bit of moss here and there just to make it look a little more natural. I decided to add a little bit of moss on the end here as well, just to create more of a whimsical look, just to make it look like the moss is spilling out over the log as it's growing. I think it's just so magical. So now I'm going to work on the base, the little platform that we created so that our log wasn't rolling around. Again, just adding a little bit of hot glue and using the moss to cover up that wood piece. I'd actually love to know if you have any whimsical DIYs that you'd like me to recreate, so drop me a comment down below. So it came together so well. I'm just going to show you how you can just pop that wood end and then turn those lights off so easily, and then you can change out the batteries very easily as well. You can put your wood slice or moss back into place. Here it is. I am absolutely thrilled with how amazing this little piece turned out. I am so excited that I was able to put this together for you. Let me know what you think of this project. This jewelry box has definitely seen some better days. The hardware is corroded, there's the ugly old pink velveting, and even the faux stained glass is chipping away. So we are going to fix it up. I'm going to start off by removing all the hardware. So dig out those screwdrivers, and don't forget you're also going to need to keep these in a nice tray so you don't lose all those little pieces. Now, one thing I did learn along the way is that a magnetized screwdriver would definitely have beneficial because these screws are so little. I'm just removing the hinges off of the door now. I want to remove all the hardware so I can properly prep this piece so I can create a beautiful textured finish on here. So just remember, you want to set that aside. So inside here, you can see that there is a rotating necklace holder. I struggled with this a bit, and I discovered that there was a bracket on the inside of this little piece here, and I needed to use some needle nose pliers to squeeze it together to release the turning bit. I'll show you right here. You can see how I had to pinch that together, and that allowed me to remove the hook, the necklace holder. Now I'm able to access those screws to remove the rest of the necklace holder mechanism. I won't be reusing those pieces, so you can save them for a future project, or you can just throw those away. Now here I am removing the magnet as well. The one screw is again kind of difficult to get at, but I did manage. Next, we're going to remove all the hardware off of the door, and we will be reusing these pieces, so you will definitely need to set those aside in your tray. So the handle on this door was another piece that I struggled with, so I ended up using just some pliers, or here's some wire cutters, to pull on it and then twist, pull again, and continue to twist until it released. You could see that it was quite a hefty screw, so I put that aside as I'm going to reuse that as well. Now I'm going to start to remove all that icky pink rose felt. I don't even know what this material is. I used a painter's palette to lift it away. It's a nice sturdy blade, but it's able to get into tight spaces. And as you can see, I'm also using a hair dryer. The hair dryer helps to release some of the adhesive. Here I'm using my tool to scrape away some of those paper bits and the adhesive. Some spots were really tough to work on, and then that released and pulled right out. So I realized at this point I should have maybe waited to remove the drawer pulls, but I managed to get those little drawers out because we need to remove all of that pink fabric cardboard out of the inside of these drawers as well. All right, so now we need to clean up the inside of our little drawers. I'm using some rubbing alcohol on a rag, and that soaked into the paper really well. And I'm using my painter's palette to scrape away all the excess paper. Now, I preferred this method, but I did realize after working away on it, it didn't remove the adhesive. So that part was left behind, but I used a sanding block to get in there, and that helped to smooth the surface down. You don't need to remove all the little bits, but you do want to make the surface smooth. All right, so here I am now sanding down the surface. There was a lot of grime on the surfaces of these little drawers and the jewelry box as a whole. I also needed to sand it down because the paint finish or the varnish was really shiny. So I needed to prep the surface for painting. So I'm going to do the same prep for the door, again sanding it down. The surface was so shiny, and I knew that the paint would not adhere to this. Another option would be to use some paint stripper, but I find that so I'm just going to continue to work on my surface and removing the excess dust with a rag until my surface is all scuffed up and ready to paint. I'm going to work on the glass panel now as well. Again, I'm going to use some rubbing alcohol. Now, I have no idea if it was already loosened up or if the rubbing alcohol loosened this. As I was gently scraping away with my painter's palette knife, the faux glass, stained glass, just popped right off. I was actually really impressed. So again, I don't know if that was the rubbing alcohol or not because some of the pieces had already fallen off, but it did help to loosen up the rest of it, and it also helped to clean the glass really well. I'm going to give everything a coat of gesso. Gesso is a primer that artists use on canvases, but I find that it actually works really well on wood pieces, plastic pieces, anything that is dark or shiny. I find that gesso works really well as a primer. The reason why I'm doing that is because I had fiddled around before and I discovered that this stain, varnish, whatever was used on this piece bled through the paint. This gesso seals that all up and also provides a nice smooth surface for the paint to adhere to. You will also use less paint if you prime your pieces. Yes, it is a lot of work, but it's definitely going to be worth it in the end. So I'm just going to cover the entire piece with my gesso, except for those spots where I know I won't be painting. I had this bottle of a leaf green paint sitting around for a while and I've been wanting to use it up. So I'm going to mix that along with some cream paint to create a really pretty, nice, lighter green color. I'm loving this color right now. I think it's just beautiful. And I am going to apply this paint all over the surfaces of our jewelry box. I will be applying a total of 2 coats. So here now I'm just clearing those little holes for our drawer pull, and I'm also distressing the surface. I'm using my sanding block, and what that'll do is bring out all the different layers that are underneath. It's a really cool effect. To really help the distressing pop, I like to apply a coat of varnish. You can think of it as being similar to wax if you're doing a chalk finish. That would be really cool as well. But this is what I do when I am just using some craft paint. And you can see the difference here. It's really effective. So I'm going to go over, again, all of my pieces with a coat of varnish. And I'm also going to be distressing all of my pieces. For the main jewelry piece here, I did end up having to go in with a finer grit. I'm telling you, that gesso really helped to hold the paint down into place. The brand of varnish that I actually love to use is the Matte Finish by Decor. I decided to distress it some more by using some archival ink in potting soil and leaf green. I like to apply my archival inks using some makeup sponges. Now, you don't have to do this step, but I find that it really adds some interest to your piece, as if it has been touched by dirty little fingers over the years and the dirt kind of collects on all these little spots. So I'm just going to add the 2 colors here and there. You can kind of see the difference there. And I'm placing some more of the ink in around where the drawer pulls would be. I'm also applying some to the main piece, and I'm concentrating on corners, again, kind of where you would typically see dirt marks on furniture pieces from over the years of use. All right, I'm digging out the power tools. I needed to drill a hole in the bottom of this piece because I am going to be using some fairy lights in this, and I needed a place to hide the battery pack. I'll be showing you that here in a minute. In the meantime, I wanted to cover up the mirror, but yet still have the brightness that it can give. So I found this window covering from Dollar Tree, and it's got a beautiful floral and leaf pattern on it. I thought it would be perfect for this piece. My little cubby here measures 3 1/4 by about 8 3/4. So I cut a piece of this glass covering down to size, and what's nice about this is that it has some lines on it already, so it made measuring out the piece really easy. All right, so now I'm going to be using my archival inks again. I didn't want that stark kind of white look, so I'm going over it with the inks. I'm just kind of creating a blotchy look. I felt like that will, again, just kind of help to break up all that stark white and will give a really interesting look in the background on that mirror. You could go ahead and cover the background with some scrapbook paper if you choose, but I wanted to try something a little different, and I'm loving the way that had turned out. So I allowed the ink to set. Before I apply it though to my mirror, I needed to clean my mirror with a rag and some rubbing alcohol. That'll just remove any fingerprints that may be on there and some oils. Now I have to say, this window covering was so easy to apply. I just lifted a little bit up and stuck it onto the back. And then I used a plastic card to smooth it out to get any air bubbles out, but I actually found that I didn't have many struggles. And the beauty too is I had tested it and it pulls up really easily as well. So if you decide that you don't want this look, it's really easy to remove. So I'm just slowly removing the backing and pressing it down with my little plastic card until I've got the piece set in place. And I think that looks really cool. For the inside of our cubby, I am going to be lining it with this beautiful sheet moss. I only had a little bit of this left, and it's kind of on a webbing, and there's like a stickiness to the back as well. I'm measuring the inside of our little cubby. I needed to add some to the wall as well as to the floor and the ceiling of that little cubby. So I'm just cutting it down to size. I started off with the length, and again, it was about 8 3/4 inch tall. And I decided that what I would do is just cut this particular piece in half, and then that will go on one side of the wall and the other piece will go on the other side. Now, as you could see, my piece didn't fully fit in there, so I did need to go in and apply a bit more green paint. While that green paint is drying, I'm going to attach the battery pack for the lights. I'm attaching it with some hot glue to the underside. Make sure the battery pack door is available so you can change out those batteries when needed. I'm just going to see that my hole is big enough to fit the lights through, and it is. It's awesome. I'm using some hot glue to seal or just glue down the extra wiring. You could use some tape or anything else that you have and allow the glue to set. You can just set those lights aside for now. We're going to come back to those in a bit. I'm going to use my Aleene's tacky glue to adhere the moss sheets, and I'm spreading it out with just a plastic card. These are great to spread out glue and other textures or other mediums like that. I'm pressing the moss down into place, the sticky side down, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and as well as the floor of our little cubby and the ceiling. So I decided to cut a piece that would fit the floor as best I could, and then that extra little piece that you see, I'm gonna stick that onto the ceiling towards the back where I don't have any paint. I do have some extra moss that I will be using to fill in any spots that don't have any moss. So I'm gonna start to weed my lights through the hole, and I forgot about my sheet moss, so I did end up lifting it, but thankfully it was a mesh and the wire poked through the mesh and I was able to feed the wire through, and I just stuck the moss back down into place. I dove into my stash of some scrapbook paper. I have this Tim Holtz Ideology scrapbook paper, and I really liked these green. The texture on it was just so cool and rustic. I thought this would be perfect to create some drawer liners. I'm just using those pink pieces that we had removed out of the inside of the drawers as my templates. I cut this one piece down to size. That will be the bottom of our drawer. So I'm going to cut all my paper down to size, and I will need one bottom per drawer and a total of 4 side panels per drawer. So before I move on, I just want to make sure that I do have all the right sizes. So I am just going to place these little scraps inside before I glue them all into place. My drawers are all ready to go. And just to make things a little easier for myself, I set out some piles per drawer. So I've got one bottom piece and 4 of the side panels, and I split those up into 4 separate groups just so I wouldn't get mixed up. Again, I'm going to be using my tacky glue and my plastic card to smooth out the glue, and then I'm going to press the paper into place. I will also be using another plastic card to smooth the paper down into place and just to remove any of the bubbles. Just be careful not to use too much glue because it will ooze out quite a bit on the sides, and I didn't want that glue to get all over my paper. It will leave a bit of a, I don't know, like a matte, it will just take away from the texture of this paper. So I'm just going to continue to work on the drawers until I get all the paper put into place, and then you want this all to dry really well. While the glue is setting on all our other pieces, I'm going to work on some figurines. I got the owl and rabbit from Dollar Tree, the angel from Dollarama, and these little mushrooms, I got those from my local dollar store. I'm using warm white and a golden yellow as well as a metallic gold for all these pieces. I'm applying 2 coats of my warm white onto the angel. Now you may be wondering why I'm doing that when she's already really beautiful. Well, as I was kind of looking, doing my research on how I wanted to create this piece, I realized the little cubby I was creating was actually going to be kind of dark, and I wanted her to really stand out. So I needed to paint her a lighter color. The same thing with the owl and the rabbit. Now the owl and the rabbit, I do just a bit of dry brushing just to help to differentiate the features that are on these little figurines. Of course, feel free to paint these any way you'd like or leave them as is. For the mushrooms, I have played around with these before, and I discovered that if you don't seal them up with a primer, the color from the mushrooms is going to bleed through. So I'm going to give each of these a coat of gesso. I found again that the gesso works best for me. And I did 3 of the large mushrooms and 3 of the little tiny mushrooms, set them aside and allow them to dry really well. Once dry, paint them with the color of your choice. I'm going with this golden yellow color. I wanted to kind of keep things neutral, but if you really want a nice pop of color, then of course paint these any way you'd like. My angel's first coat of paint is all dry. Now I'm going to go over it with my second coat of craft paint, and there was still kind of a bit of a mottled look to it, but that is okay. If I wanted it to be a solid color, I would have definitely gone over it with some gesso first. My second coat of paint is all nice and dry, so now I'm going to go over it with my matte varnish, the decor matte varnish, and then I will allow that to dry really well. I needed to apply the varnish for the next step that I am going to do on this angel. And craft paint is very porous and it will end up absorbing anything else that you put over top. So I needed to seal that. Here I'm adding some little dots to the mushroom. Now I did end up doing another step to this and it ended up covering up all my little dots, so I had to reapply them. But here's what those look like before I apply this gold metallic paint. You can see how it ended up covering up those little dots. So I did end up having to go back over those little dots. I went with the gold paint and put it on and then kind of rubbed some of it off, as I wanted a bit of a sheen to be glowing off of these little mushrooms. And you'll see that effect here in a little bit. So I'm going to set those all aside to dry. Next, I'm going to be using some DecoArt walnut gel stain and a stiff bristle brush. I'm going to remove the excess using a rag, and what I did was I kind of stippled it into all the little nooks and crannies on this piece. You'll see how her features end up really popping, but you can see how it just kind of provides like a really old world look, but yet still have a nice light shade of color. So then when she's standing up against a dark background, she's still going to really pop. I'm going to set her aside and let her dry. All right, we're going to go back to our little cubby. I have got these branches that I had foraged along with my little mini lights. I'm going to start to attach my mini lights using some hot glue to the background. And you can see how the light is still glowing really nicely against that background that we had created. You're going to find that as we work on this piece, Layers is key. So you're gonna see how I'm starting at the back and then I'm gonna slowly work forward to build those layers, and those layers are gonna create some depth to our piece. It is going to be so cool, just wait. So now I'm gonna add my branches. I've got my pruning shears and I'm just going to trim my pieces down to size so they can fit inside the little cubby. I'm gonna treat this kind of like a little book nook. Book nooks are really, really cool. If you haven't seen those, then definitely look it up online. It is so cool, and this is definitely a similar look. So I'm going to apply my branches using some hot glue. I'm going to start off again working at the back and working my way forward with all my different pieces, and I'm going to just use some hot glue for all of it. I'm also making sure that some of my branches have some limbs to make it look like actual trees. All right, I've got this beautiful preserved reindeer moss. I love using reindeer moss. I find it's the easiest moss to work with. I'm using some hot glue to apply it, as well as using the end of a paintbrush to push it into all those tight little spots. So we've built up some beautiful texture in the background. Now I'm going to start to bring my scene forward. I have got this larger branch. I'm going to again cut it down to size. I want to use this branch to perch our cute little owl on. So I figured that that one limb would be the perfect place for him to sit. So I'm going to use a bit more glue on this piece. And as you can see, I'm only going to put it halfway into our little cubby. Another important thing I forgot to mention was that you want to hold your pieces into place until the glue sets, because you don't want these pieces to fall off. I'm going to continue to add some moss, and I'm adding that to the ceiling. Now, I accidentally covered up my screw holes in the ceiling part, but I do end up exposing those later on, and you'll see why in a bit. The beauty about adding some of those limbs as well is that you can actually add a branch in the middle, like I'm going to right now, and then you've got a base for it to be glued to right in the middle of the piece, like I'm doing right there. So I decided that I felt like the background just needed a bit more texture, so I'm going and adding a little bit of hot glue and pressing some of the moss into place there as well. I'm going to add our cute little owl. I keep wanting to call him oil. Owl. I'm going to add the little owl. I just figured out the points where it was going to sit on the branch, and that is where I added the glue. Going in and adding some extra glue, and then I'm going to cover up those spots with some moss. Okay, so now it's time to work on the floor of our little cubby. I'm gonna add the mushrooms. I'm just curling up the wire on one of these just so it's a little bit higher up off the floor to create some height at the back there. Adding some hot glue, and then I'm gonna go ahead and continue to add our little mushrooms and our other figurines. It's time to add our sweet little angel. Okay, so we're gonna just continue with all the little elements. I needed to camouflage the base of the angel, so I added a bit more moss around her feet there. I also want to continue to weave the rest of the lights in around the front and part way through, using some hot glue where needed to help hold the lights into place. So we're going to put the glass back in place on our door. Now, I did discover that with mine, there was a bit of paint buildup in the corners, so the glass didn't fit back in properly. So I just used a tool to scrape it out, and then the glass fit in there just fine. I did use a rag to smooth it out, so I didn't cut myself. I'm now using the brackets that were on there before to help hold the glass back in place. I'm also adding the hinges back into place as well, so we can put those into place on the main piece. I'm also going to be reusing the door handle too, which I'll show here in a minute. I used a bamboo skewer to just clean out the holes, the screw holes, so it was easier for me to put those little screws back into place. Here's the handle. There was some weird stickiness on the back, so I just used a tool to scrape that off. And let me tell you, it was so much easier putting this back in than it was for me to pull it out. So I just put that in, and I really like the way that looks. Feel free to change up any of the hardware the way you'd like. I really like the patina on all of these. They were really rustic and rugged, so I stuck with all the hardware that came with this. Putting the drawers into place as well. Went back in really smoothly after I let it dry really well. I'm also adding the magnets back into place. I wanted to put the magnets back because as I was fiddling around with this, the door wasn't staying closed on its own. So this was a definite must for me. So I'm just re-exposing those little screw holes again using my painter's palette. I had to remove some of the moss and some branches, but it was enough. I did struggle with putting this back into place again. One of those magnetized screwdrivers would be amazing for this, but I made do, and I'll show you a little hack that I used to put these back into place here in a moment. So I started off with one side, and I started to try and put this one that was right against the wall back into place, but wasn't working. So I used some hot glue, put my screwdriver into place, and then I was able to get that in just fine. And the glue peeled off as well, so you're not left with that little glob of glue there. I'm using my blow dryer to remove any of the glue strings. And then I added a bit more moss just to help camouflage our magnet a little bit. And then it is ready to be put on display. Let me tell you, I feel like I am going back to my childhood where my imagination would run wild when I was out in the forest thinking about fairies and little pixies. I think this is just amazing. I am loving it. I have these really old books. They were actually my great-grandma's. They've even got her signature inside. And I thought they were just so cool and unique. And I really like how grungy and old and weathered they are. This one has got that tape on it. Somebody obviously attempted to try and bind it together, but I really didn't like the way that looked, so I just removed that tape. I'm not sure how I can get the rest of that adhesive off, as it's really dried on there, but I just decided to leave it. So what I'm going to be doing is stacking the books together, one on top, but I wanted to build something on top of it without gluing things directly onto the book. So I'm cutting down some strips of fabric. I'm going to create kind of like a ribbon wrap, I guess you could say. So I've got my two books stacked on top of each other. I cut down my fabric to size, and then I'm going to add some glue just to glue the two ends together. But first, before I did that, I decided to fray the edges. I like the look that that gives, And you can actually save all those little bits for some bird's nests that I've got here on my channel. I've got they turned out so real pretty. So another addition I am going to be using is some birch bark. I just tore off these thin pieces of birch bark and I decided I'm going to actually glue them onto the strips of fabric. So I'm just adding some hot glue and I'm going to just press those into place. You can see that the strips of birch bark are roughly the same width of the fabric. I did leave enough of an edge on either side so that the frayed edges were showing. And then some of the little pieces that may be sticking up, I'm just going to glue those down. And here is my piece of birch bark. So I wanted to use that to wrap around the book. So I'm going to put that into place again. I'm going to wrap it around. I did leave one end empty. I didn't put any bark there. That is where I'm going to be gluing the opposite end. So I'm going to put some glue in place and glue that down. It's looking so pretty. I thought it was a fun way to create some like faux, well, not actually, it's not faux. It's birch bark ribbon. I created some birch bark ribbon, which I thought was just a fun look. Okay, so I've got that in place. I also have this pretty crochet trim. It's kind of got like an antique-y color, which I thought was really pretty. So I'm finding the center of it by just folding it in half here. And then I'm going to glue the center on the underside. You can see I glued it onto the birch. And then I'm going to straighten that crochet trim down, or straighten it out so it stays nice and straight. Wrapped it around the front and I'm going to just tie that in a knot. You can see it's thin enough that it didn't cover up the birch bark, but it gave me just a little bit to work with here, as I wanted to tie a tag onto this little bundle and I wanted to tie it on with that. So I've got some words here. I'm going to put these words onto the tag. I just decided to distress them a little bit here. I cut these words down out of like a magazine. Those are great places to find some words to use for your crafting, or you can print them out, whatever you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and just glue all of these into place onto my tag. You can put anything you'd like. If you want, you can even just stamp an image or put a sticker on your tag. I really like the look of the words. So I just used a glue stick, put those into place. See how pretty that is? I like to outline my words with a black pen, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I just find that it really helps it to just pop a little bit more. If you know what I mean, you can see how that looks there. I've got this string, it's just some crochet string. Just folded it in half, put the loop through the hole, and then I'm gonna pull the tails through that loop. And you can see I've got like a nice little tie. It looks like a parcel tie. I'm gonna tie that around the lace that we've got there in place. Just gonna go ahead, put that in place, and then tie that on. So for this project, I am going to add this beautiful bird's nest that I made. So again, I've got lots of tutorials on how to make bird's nests. I'll have that playlist listed down below for you. If you don't want to do a bird's nest, you could add some flowers, or you could just add some greenery, but you're building up all your work on top of that ribbon, so you're not gluing directly onto your books. I think it turned out absolutely beautiful. I think bird's nests are so fitting. They look beautiful in a garden, and it's such a nice way to bring the outdoors into your home. For this project, you're going to need a total of 8 canvases. This is the 14 by 11 size. Gonna be pulling out the staples and removing that canvas. You can use that canvas for another project. You'll just want to set that aside. I'm gonna, again, do a total of 8 of these. That's how they look. I've got 4 of them to start. I'm gonna be giving the first set of 4 a coat of some leaf green craft paint. So I'm leaving 2 sides without paint because those you're not even going to see. I'm flipping them upside down and I'm going to be painting the back sides as well. And you want to allow them to dry well. When I originally did this project, I actually did this for the fall and winter, but I thought, you know what, it's got such a nice gardeny look that I'm like, why can't you use this for any time of year? And that's exactly what I do. It stays up all year long. All right, so my frames are all dry. You can see how the edge here, there's no paint. I'm going to be gluing all those edges together. I added some hot glue. I'm pressing the first 2 frames together. I'm going to glue the second 2 set of frames together, and I am just using some hot glue, but you can use a combination of hot glue and wood glue. Now I'm going to be gluing the 2 sets together. I will be using some craft sticks here, some jumbo craft sticks, to help stabilize all the joints that I've got. I'm going to just be using hot glue for these as well. All right, so I've got my joints all stabilized. I've got this beautiful cotton fabric. It's got like an off-white color. It's got a bit of a pattern on it. I'm going to be cutting 2 panels down to size, and I'm going to be cutting just a large piece to start. I'll be folding that piece in half and then cutting that piece in half, the larger piece in half. I hope that makes sense, to create 2 smaller panels. I am cutting this piece to be a bit bigger than what the actual window frame is because I wanted to create a little bit of like pleating, and so I needed just a little extra fabric for each panel. So I did go a little bit further than the actual window frame. All right, so I cut my 2 panels down to size. I decided to coffee dye this. I thought it would create like a primitive, rustic, grungy look. I really like that look. It'll look like a window in, say, an old garden shed. That's the kind of thought that I had in mind when I was making this. So I just soaked it in some old coffee. I'm gonna lay the fabric out onto a cookie sheet, put it in the oven on a low temp, and allow it to dry, or you could even let this air dry. While that is in the oven right now drying, I'm splattering the picture frame with some burnt umber paint, and it's mixed with some water. I don't know, I felt like it just needed to be like grunged up a little bit more. So I did that, and later on I do end up dry brushing a little bit of the paint on as well. My fabric is all dry, and you can see by putting it in the oven, it created like some more concentrated stains on the fabric. Also, it gets hard and crunchy, so that's why I decided to iron it out. I'm okay with the wrinkles, but it just was too crunchy for me to use. All right, so I'm gonna start to glue these fabric panels into place. I am making the look of curtains. So I'm gonna just glue these into the corner just to start with, because you can see that the fabric is really, really bulky. I started to pleat this, but in the end, I actually ended up ripping it off because by pleating it, well, you'll see here, it's going to only cover half the window, and I didn't quite like the way it looked, but I'm going to show you anyways in case that is the look that you're going for. So you're just folding your fabric and adding glue under all those folds that you're creating until you get to the end. Just making sure that you got all those little folds glued down will help to keep it all into place. I am gluing the edge down now. You could do this to start. It doesn't really matter either way. I think because I wasn't exactly sure where I was going with this at first, that's why I didn't glue that edge down, but you can see what it's looking like there. And so I did the one side, and this is what it looked like. And I thought, you know what, it's okay, but I ended up ripping this off because I wanted that top edge to go all the way across the top here. So I just started to glue it down, and I just kind of scrunched it up. I pleated it a little bit, but it wasn't needed as much unless you're going to be just doing it halfway like I originally did. So that's going to be up to you which way you want to do it. Just there's really no right or wrong. It's going to just be personal preference. You just want to make sure you have enough fabric to work with. So you definitely want to make sure that you've cut it down to size. this is what it looks like now. And I'm actually a lot happier with this. This is more the look that I'm going with. It's like you're in your garden shed and you can just kind of peek through it and see what's going on outside. All right, I'm gonna start working on the next set of 4 frames, and I'm staining them with I started off with some oak stain, but I didn't like how that looked. So I mixed some black paint in with my oak stain. And now that created more of a walnut stain. At this point, when I was working on this project, I was all out of walnut stain, so I made my own. Okay, so now I am going to glue all of these frames together the same way as the green ones. And I also kind of braced them in a few different spots. And I'll show you why here in a moment. Okay, so you can see how I have my craft sticks in a few different spots compared to the green one. I'm adding some Aleene's tacky glue onto all of those craft sticks, as well as in a few different spots to glue the 2 frames together. I really like to use tacky glue. I find it's got really good long lasting adhesion. A lot of times I will use a combination of Aleene's tacky glue with hot glue. I find that what happens is the Aleene's tacky glue has got some good long-term hold, whereas the hot glue will give you that immediate hold that you need while your wet glue is drying. Although these days it seems like the hot glue works really well too. All right, so you can see I've got that into place. I'm just adding some weight on top to help to set that all up. And then you can put it on display. Here it's set up for fall, but like I said, this garden window could be used for any time of the year. So first thing I wanted to do was remove some of these wood embellishments. So I'm just taking a blow dryer and I'm heating them up, as that helps to release the glue. I'm also going to be using a metal paint palette knife or a metal spatula. Either one would work really well. You just needed something thin to get underneath to help pop and release the adhesive and release that wood piece. Now, some of the pieces may be left behind, but that is okay, because this part of this wood panel is actually going to end up on the inside of our project. So I've removed all of those embellishments. Just going to cut off the tags, getting rid of that string. I didn't bother removing that snow line that's on the roof. That can stay in place, but I needed to remove all those other wood embellishments, because as you can see, I am going to be cutting through to create a door, and I'm also going to be cutting some pieces out for windows, and those wood embellishments were getting in my way. So I've got a craft mat and a sharp craft knife along with a metal ruler, and I'm just cutting through this piece until those pieces release. Now, if you've got a laser cutting machine, I highly recommend that you use that. I'm not sure if a Cricut Maker will cut through this or not. If you know, then please let us all know down in the comments section. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue to cut out all my windows, and then I will show you what that looks like. I had this wire mesh basket in my stash for a long time, again from Dollar Tree. I'm going to cut it down to size so it will fit over my window openings. So this is the look that I'm trying to recreate, something just similar. Those baskets actually come in white as well, so if you prefer white, then definitely pick up that basket. So like I said, I'm just using some wire snips, and I'm going to cut this down to size. And then once you have one smaller piece, they do need to be bent just a little bit because they are a bit curved, but it is very flexible. So you can see how that's looking. It looks really cool, and I needed to cut this down smaller. Originally, this piece, I ended up cutting it down too small, but I just kind of fiddled around and worked with all my different pieces until I had some wire mesh that fit each individual window. I'm just going to use my hot glue gun and hot glue just to adhere these pieces into place. I went around the window as you saw me doing there, and then I'm just going to press this into the glue, and I'm going to allow that to set up a bit. You do want to press it down a little bit just to help secure it. And now I'm going to go over top again. That will help to really secure that wire mesh into place over top of each window. So again, that backside there, that is going to all be on the inside. This here at the front is what you're going to be seeing on the exterior. I'm going to be using some modeling paste. I want to create kind of like a textured finish. If you look at some pictures of some country garden cottages, you will see that they are either made of stone or there's like a plaster that's over them. I decided I'm going to use this modeling paste to create a plaster look. And I'm using a palette knife to apply it to the wood panel. Again, this is going to be the outside of a cottage that we are going to be creating. Now, I decided to, again, like I said, use modeling paste because that's what I have on hand, and this container was starting to dry out a little bit, so I'm like, I really need to start using this up. But as an alternative, you can mix craft paint with baking soda, and you can see this is the texture that you will get when you mix those two together. It's a really fun finish. I'll have a tutorial for you down below. In addition, I'm going to be using these wood shelves that I got from Dollar Tree as well. And I've had these again for a long time. So I'm going to be using the modeling paste over top of this and plugging up those holes as well. Again, you want to make sure you create lots of interesting texture to create that plaster look. I had set them aside to allow them to dry well, and once that's done, I'm going to be using some Whisper chalk paint by DecoArt as my color. So you can use whatever paint you like. With chalk paint, I find that you only need one coat. It also helps to create that nice texture that we're going for. So I just applied one coat of this paint all over the surfaces, the exterior surfaces only. We're not worrying about the inside of our houses at this point. You can see the color difference here. You can see the nice finish that we have got here. It looks so pretty. I'm really happy with it. Now I wanted to seal this up with some matte varnish. I like to use the DecoArt brand. I'm just going to go ahead and give one coat. You want to make sure you've got good coverage. And the reason is because the paint, the chalk paint we used, it's porous. So anything we apply over top of it will be absorbed into the paint. And I wanted to create a distressing finish. And if I don't seal this up, I'm not going to have very good control. It's just going to get absorbed right into the paint, and I don't want that. While the varnish is drying, I'm going to work on my door. I've got some craft sticks here, and I'm just going to cut off the rounded tip off of just one end. So I struggled a little bit. Usually I can cut it off with some scissors. So I tried my wire snips, it came off. I'm just going to clean it up a little bit, but I'm going to do that to 4 of the craft sticks. You can also see here that I've got some smaller little craft sticks. I lined up my larger ones all side by side. I have the cutout piece that I have of my door. I'm going to be just using that as a template. It's just off to the side. I'm just figuring out where I need to place my craft braces. That's what I'm using, the little pieces. That's going to attach all of my pieces together. But what I'm doing here is just tracing out where I want to cut out a window. Yes, I thought it would be really cool to create a window in the door. So I was just figuring out my placement, and now I'm going to cut that portion out. Here I'm just cutting off the top part of my door. This is going to be in the middle section. And then I'm cutting now the part where the window is. I'm going to be doing that to the second piece because there was 2 pieces that I am cutting down to size to create that window cutout for my door. So I'm using my wood cut or door cutout as my base, just to figure out where I need to place my little bracing pieces, those little mini craft sticks. I just got those from my local craft store. And then I'm going to now just make sure that the top two middle pieces are going to be trimmed down evenly. And then I'm going to be putting those into place. I wanted to add the wire mesh to this window opening as well. Just remember, like, those two brace pieces, that's actually going to be the outside of my door. So I'm going to cut down a piece of wire mesh and it's going to go on the back side of my door. So just cutting it down to size, and then you'll see how that looks here in a moment. Just figuring out where I want those mesh pieces to be showing. I thought it would be really cool to have the diamond in the center. And then I'm adding my hot glue just over top, holding it into place until the glue sets. And then I'm going to just set the door aside for now. We are going to come back to it. But now that the varnish has dried, I'm going to use this walnut gel stain again from decor. I need some water, a paintbrush, and I do have a rag on hand as well. I'm using my paintbrush and I'm going to apply this gel stain all over our panels that have been painted. You can see how that gel stain gets into all those nooks and crannies, but it's not getting completely absorbed into our paint, changing the color. Can see how much control I have. I can even go in, add a little bit of water to my rag and wipe some of that stain away if I find that it's too much. And you can see how easy it is just to clean that off. So sometimes too, I like to go back in, add some more of that stain and just really play around until I have a look that I am really happy with. You can see how that stain is getting gathered up into all those little textured parts that we have created. I've got all of my panels done. I allowed them all to dry really well and I love how it looks. So now we're going to start to put the door into place, but I discovered because of the wire mesh, I need to add some bracing to the back side as well, because if I put my window in place, you'll see it's tippy because of it's just not flat on the back side. So I needed to create some bracing just to prevent it from tipping back and forth. You can see now I added those few craft sticks and it's so much better. I'm just going to trim off those excess pieces on the side first before I continue on. Now I can start to glue some of those pieces onto the back side of our door so it sits flat against our house wood panel. I'm going to glue one of my little mini craft sticks to the top of the door, and then I'm going to glue a few more, and sometimes I have to lay it on top of the house panel just to make sure I've got my placement correct. Because right now, as it is, our door, as you can see, is too long. So here I'm just trying to figure out where I need one more. So what I decided to do was trim off the bottom. So I just used my pencil just to outline where the bottom of our door needs to be trimmed off. And I'm going to go ahead and either use my wire snips or you can use some junky scissors. And again, trimming off any of the excess bits around the edge. So the other thing I'm going to work on as well will be the window frames, but you can see here how well our door fits and sits against the wood panel or a house panel. Here I've got some craft sticks and I'm going to just outline each of the window frame with the different sizes that I have. I decided to go with a thicker piece on the top and some thinner ones on the sides and the bottom of our window frame. I'm going to just trim off the rounded ends of each of the craft sticks. Now you can just use regular craft sticks. Another option would be to use some bamboo skewers if you can't get your hands on craft sticks like these. But I really like the look that these create, a nice thick, chunky window frame. I think that is a really really pretty look. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just trim these down until they fit around our windows the way I like. So once you have your window frame pieces all done, I'm going to give each piece a coat of the gel stain again. I'm using the same gel stain that I used to create my distressing, just applying it to the wood, wiping it off with a rag, and you can see the color difference there. So I did lay down my window frame pieces to each window that I cut them out to, so then I knew exactly which pieces went where, because otherwise you'll just get lost and confused. I also did the door, and I'm going to create a top piece for our door. I just thought it would finish it off a little bit nicer, and I do end up adding more of a frame around the door, which I will be showing you a little bit later, but I didn't discover I needed to do that until a little bit later. But in the meantime, I'm just going to just go ahead and create this top frame for our door. I thought the two little pieces just would add some really nice dimension. You can see that here. And I'm just using my hot glue to adhere all the pieces together. I've set my door aside for now because I felt like it would get in the way of me gluing all my window frame pieces into place. So now I'm going to do that. And I have to say, I really think this looks so good. So as I was starting to work on this last window frame, I discovered that my pieces weren't long enough, so it didn't stretch out across the window as I had hoped. So I needed to take two pieces and I cut them in half. I know it may not make sense, but then once I had them cut in half, I was able to have a long enough piece to go across. Yes, there's a seam in the middle, but I'm going to be covering that up, so you're not even going to see that. I actually had thought of another idea. You may be able to get your hands on some wood coffee stir sticks. Those would probably work really well for some window frames as well. I decided to get a little adventurous here. I'm going to be using this big chomper. You can see I'm using the 1/8 hole punch. This punches through metal. It's so cool. But what I wanted to do was create some outdoor lights. So I'm just going to mark where I want my lights to be. So you can see I had some fairy lights there. I needed to do this before I put my door into place. Otherwise, it would be difficult for me to punch those holes. So you can see it punches through. It did damage the backside, but again, we're not going to see that. I am going to do the other side. It punched through really well, but I misaligned it. So later on, you're going to see I ended up having to re-punch it, but it wasn't a big deal. It was an easy fix. So now that I've got those holes in place for my lights, now I can put my door into place. I'm just figuring out where I needed this to be lined up to make sure I've got good contact between the door and my house panel. So once I have it all lined up, I'm going to take a pencil and just mark out where my door is going to be. And then I'm going to use some hot glue to put it into place. Now, I wasn't thinking at this point, you do not need to run a full bead of glue where the opening is of our wood panel, but I do have a fix for that anyways. Once you've got the hot glue in place, you want to put the door onto your wood panel, and this is when I discovered that I had that excess glue. So I just took a piece that I had cut out for my window, and I'm just going to trim it down so it fits and covers up that glue. And then I thought, you know what, this would actually provide some extra bracing for our door anyways to prevent it from falling off. So I'm just going to trim off the end bit here. You don't have to do all this. This is just what I ended up doing because of the excess glue. And then when I realized that, you know what, it could just use some extra bracing. You can see I didn't even get some some hot glue at the touch points between the house panel and the door. So I had to go back in. I'm just cleaning up the excess glue. And then at this point too, once I was fiddling around, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna add just a little bit of extra bracing. So I had this a little scrap piece. I was just fiddling around, and you can see it has a hole in it because I was testing my hole punch to see if it would cut through the craft sticks, and it did. But anyways, I used that for some extra bracing at the back side of our door, and now I know it's not gonna go anywhere. At this point, I also discovered that I needed to frame out the sides of our door as well. So I stained the front and back of some craft sticks. You can see that there is a gap showing, and it did not look good at all. But once I added this piece of craft stick, it hid it all. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue that in place. I already trimmed off the rounded tip of one end, and I just added a bead of hot glue, press it into place, allow that glue to set, and you'll see it just looks so much better. So now I'm just going to cut off the other two ends of these craft sticks. I don't know why I was struggling so much with either my wire cutters or my scissors, but one moment they would work one time, next moment they wouldn't work for me. I don't know. Anywho, I needed to add some craft sticks to make the sides even with that snow piece that still remains. I didn't bother removing the snow peak because I found in the past when I did that, it weakened the integrity of the top of our roof line. So I just left that in place. But a reason why I'm adding these craft sticks on the edge, again, like I said, I needed it to be even. When I go to add my walls, it will have a gap if I did not add these craft sticks. So here are my wood panels for the sides and creating my wall. And now it fits nice and flush against the back side of our house panel. It is a really easy, simple solution. Also, I didn't mention, I ended up trimming the craft stick on an angle so it fit right up against that snow trim. I added a bead of hot glue, and I'm pressing my wood panel into place to create my wall. And you want to make sure it is as straight as possible, and I'm adding an extra bit of hot glue to the inside of the seam, and this hot glue works really, really well for this. So next I'm going to add my other panel, and I put that into place same way as before. Now I'm going to add the back side of our house. So I'm just going to kind of make sure it is all ready to go, and I'm going to add my hot glue, press my panel into place. I'm going to hold it and set it. You don't have a whole lot of time here, so you want to make sure that all the edges are nice and flush with each other. I hope this is all making sense. I have some other tutorials on how I created cabins in the same or similar ways. I'm going to have links to those tutorials for you down in the video description below. So it's all coming together really nicely. Now it's time to work on our roof. I'm using some cardboard pieces. I do have some other ways you can create a roof in those other videos, but I'm trying something different here. I'm just going to use some cardboard, and I'm cutting 2 panels out. And as you can see, I have some flaps that I am creating on each end of our cardboard because I want this to fit on the inside of our roof line. And I needed a spot for me to add glue so that there was a touch point between the cardboard and our wood panel, just like you may see me doing here. Now I ended up trimming off some excess here, but I actually shouldn't have, because I end up having to go in later on and adding an extra piece because I didn't cut things down properly. But anyways, I cut down a second piece of cardboard the same way I did my first one. I'm just going to trim off a corner on just one end, and that will help us to butt the pieces up together without them conflicting with each other. Once you have your cardboard pieces cut out, you can then start to adhere them. I'm adding some, again, hot glue, and I'm putting one flap into that hot glue and pressing it into place, making sure things are lined up. If it's not absolutely perfect, that is okay, because we are going to be covering this up anyway, so you're not going to see it. just so you know too, I am using a sturdy piece of cardboard. It's just packaging from some, I think they were like some fig bars that I had. Anyway, so I just added those two cardboard pieces into place, both the same way. And here you'll see I have a gap. I should have plugged up these holes earlier. I don't know why I didn't. So I just sealed those all up and I followed all the same procedures as before. I decided to use this orange acetate. I wanted to create the look of some stained amber glass. So you can see the difference there. I should have done this sooner, so I had a piece of acetate just covering each individual window. But since I didn't do that, I'm like, okay, let's just cut off a corner and put a whole sheet inside, so then all of the windows are covered with that acetate. I'm adding some hot glue to any of the touch points between the wood panel, the inside of our house, and the acetate. Quickly working here, putting the acetate into place, and then I'm going to push it down into the hot glue and allowing it to set. I'm just using a smaller piece of this acetate to cover the back window. And now I'm just going to trim off any of the excess, but you can see that there is a slight amber color coming through, and I really think that looks so good and makes those windows look more authentic. You can see I added a piece of cardboard already to cover up that peak so there was no empty hole. I decided that I also wanted to add a chimney. So I had a piece of wood, just a square peg, and I'm just cutting out a square hole to fit that square peg that I had. This is just from some like kids wood stacking block kit that I had in my stash. Now I decided to start to really embellish this. I am using some distressed ink in the peeled paint. I'm adding just some bits here and there. I wanted it to kind of look mossy, or like there's algae kind of growing on the house. I thought that this would add just to a really unique gardeny look. I'm not covering the entire house with it. I'm just going in a few spots and adding this, rubbing off the excess. And I have to say, I really like that look. All right, so now to work on those front lights. I poked one fairy light through that second hole that I created. You can see there, I do end up filling in that first hole I created, but I wanted to start to put these little lights into place. I'm using some hot glue and then pressing that little fairy light into place. You have to kind of bend the wire and whatnot. This one I folded in half, poked it through the hole. Oh, and also, just so you know, I did have to poke a hole through the acetate as well because I added that acetate later, but it was really easy. I just took an awl and poked it through. I have these little tacks. I've got a brad and I've got these upholstery tacks. These upholstery tacks, I just needed to snip off the pin that was on it. And then I really liked the shape of it. It looked like a flower, but they're like a clear plastic, or a clear acrylic, and I thought they would be so cool to use as an exterior light. So I added some hot glue, pressed that flower into place. As an option, you could use some beads, or you can just leave the fairy light as is. That would look really good as an exterior light, but I really liked how this turned out. Now I'm adding a brad, and the brad is going to be used as a door handle, or doorknob, sorry. I just trimmed off the little metal pieces that were sticking out, and I added some hot glue, and I'm going to put that on the door, and look how good it is. It's really coming together. I'm really happy with this. Next, I'm going to be using this coconut fiber pot liner, and I'm going to be using this for my roof. I really wanted to create the look of a thatched roof. Again, if you go looking, you'll see that some spring garden cottages have got thatched roofs, which I thought was a really cool look. And I thought the best way to come up with that look would be to use these coconut fiber liners. So another option would be to use some Spanish moss, or you could maybe use some faux grass. There's lots of different ideas. Again, I've got other tutorials on how I cover my roof, so you can go go and check those out as well for some different ideas. So I'm just trimming this down. Best way to do this is actually to glue this into place first and then trim it off to make sure that you've got good coverage of the entire roof. This does stretch out a little bit and it's a little bit moldable, so I was just kind of doing that as I was going along. And I'm just going to be using my hot glue to put it into place. Make sure you have some overhang because you want that to hide the cardboard and the roof line all around. So now you can see I'm just adding my hot glue, pressing the second panel into place, and now I'm going to be trimming around and just continue to work on it until you have a look that you are happy with. Again, if you look at some cottages, you'll see that they have an extra piece of thatching that goes over the peak. So I'm just going to cover my peak with an extra piece here. I just had to trim it down. But before I did that, I decided to just glue down the edges to make sure that our roof line edge was covered, because I don't want that to look like a snowy peak. So if you just mold it to the edge, it will get rid of that snowy peak look. I just remembered I needed to cut out the hole for my chimney, so I'm just working on that right now. It did take a little bit of work, but I just have to keep playing around until you can get that wood peg into place. Another option would be to use a branch in there, in that hole. You don't have to use a square peg, just use whatever will fit. All right, so now I'm going to put my peak into place. So I'm just adding a bit of glue, pressing this down, and then I'm going to continue to glue and trim as needed until I have that peak covered. I'm also going to go ahead and just trim off the ends and then kind of mold it to fit around the top of the peak here as well. And going in and adding some hot glue there to help me mold it to the roof line. Wow, this is looking great. I really am loving it. So now it's time to decorate it, to give it that garden-y look. I've got a bunch of assorted little scraps of florals. I also have these faux moss stones that I picked up from my local dollar store. I've got some preserved greenery here that I got from Dollar Tree. I don't end up using it, but I wanted to show it to you in case you wanted some different ideas for some faux greenery. I've got this reindeer moss. It's my favorite to use. I'm going to just trim down some pieces of some scrap greenery that I had, and then I'm going to create a little faux window box underneath the top window above the door. That is going to cover up that seam that we had around the window frame, and I'm just going to be using an assortment of some different greens. I love Dollar Trees, like they have these spring meadow look florals. I haven't been into Dollar Tree for quite a while now, so let me know if they still have a really pretty assortment of some greenery there. You can see how our cute little window box is looking. So my lights were getting in my way, so I thought, you know what, let's deal with it. I'm gluing my battery pack into place on the inside. You want to make sure that the switch is accessible, as well as being able to change out the batteries. You could use some Velcro if you'd like. I'm also going to be gluing the lights into place. I didn't want to see the wire strand through the window, so I thought if I glued the lights into place on the wall, it'll just look like lights on the inside of the house, like wall sconces or whatnot. I am strategically placing some of these lights underneath the window so that there is a pretty glow coming through. Now I'm going to start to use these moss stones. I thought they would be really cool to use as like shrubs to kind of give like an interesting shrub look. I'm just cutting them down and then figuring out placement. Some of them I'm cutting in half and just kind of piecing them together. I will be using my moss and going in here and there, and it'll cover up any of those seams that you may see. If you'd like, you can even add some real rocks, real twigs, any like pieces of bark, and just lots of different things. I just wanted to create this with some of these items because a lot of times I do use lots of natural elements, but I also wanted just to show you how you can take some store-bought things and create a beautiful piece as well. So I added some reindeer moss. Now I'm just going to go in and add some little pieces of greenery and some florals. Just work with what you have to create a really pretty spring look. I'm loving how this is looking so far. It looks so beautiful. Now I'm going to work on the sides and the back of our house. Just the same thing, just adding some different elements to create a gardeny look. For the back side of the house, I decided to keep it really simple, and all I did was add some moss and a little bit of greenery. It depends on where you're placing this within your home. It'll determine on how you want to decorate the back side of your house. I was just keeping this on a counter where you wouldn't see the backside really, so I kept it very simple, but you can see how beautiful this is. I absolutely love it. Okay, so now we need to work on the chimney. I used a blow dryer to get rid of some glue strings because they were getting in my way. And now I'm going to use my small brick pattern scrapbook paper to cover this little wood block. Sorry. But like I said, if you just have a branch, all you need to do is cut it down to size and just use that and put it into place. I'm going to cut down my scrapbook paper. It is the exact width that I need, and I'm just going to use a glue stick here. It's not a hot glue, it's just a regular glue stick, but it's extra strength, and I'm going to use that on the paper, and then I'm going to wrap our peg with that paper and then trim off any of the excess. I decided to use frayed burlap distress ink to just aged the chimney a little bit. It was a little too stark white and didn't really go with our cottage very well. So I'm just going to add a little bit of color here and there just to dull that white down a little bit. And I have to say, it looks so much better. You can see how much better that looks. So I'm going to press it into the hole that we created. And I'm going to use hot glue to help adhere it. You do want to put it into place, and then I'm going to add some hot glue to the backside and around. And don't worry, you're not going to see the glue when we're done because I am going to add a touch of moss, but you want to hold it in place while the glue sets. And then I'm going to add some hot glue to the inside around the peg as well. I added some hot glue to the underside around the square peg, and I added some moss on the top, and there you go. This turned out absolutely amazing. It's, again, one of my absolute favorite pieces that I have made. Let me know what you think. I want to thank you all so very much for joining me. I've got so many other ideas for you to check out in this playlist right here. We will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.